Okay, good morning everybody. Great to have you all here with us. Also means you're all safe and well, which is great. Hope you're all looking forward to the Easter weekend. You might just let me know that you can all hear me, that you can see the screen. Let us know in the chat. Give us a hands up in the chat if you can hear and see us. Just start coming in. Great, thank you, Richard. Great to hear you can hear us. Thanks, Paul. Morning, Orla. Morning, Laura. Brilliant, Carolyn. Okay, so like I said, good morning. Thank you all for being here. For those of you who want the weather update from Mayo for this webinar, we now have a beautiful sunny morning in Mayo where we had grey overcast skies in Mayo the last time. Welcome to our second webinar, so building and maintaining trust while working remotely. My name is Fania. I am a consultant here in Great Place to Work. And the good news is you won't be hearing a lot from me this morning. You'll be hearing mainly from my colleague Cathal Divley, a partner in Great Place to Work, and from Colin Hughes, who is the head of the business school in TU Dublin. He's going to be taking you through his research around working virtually. Now, a couple of you can't seem to hear. Just make sure we're all unmuted, but most people seem to be able to hear us. So we're going to keep rolling on that. Great. Okay. So welcome back to those of you who were with us last week. We really appreciated all the feedback we got from you last week, and we really encourage you to keep that feedback coming. We've got some content coming up for you. We've got content around well-being, dealing with uncertainty, virtual recognition. We've got some more stuff on remote working in response to the feedback that we've got from you guys so far. So please keep that coming. And if you've got anything else to share with us, we'd love to hear it. We really want to kind of base these next few webinars around practical supports and insight that's going to help you kind of navigate these unusual times that we find ourselves in. So please do keep that coming. We also want to know what you're up to. So hopefully a lot of you at this stage will have received your invite to the client LinkedIn group. If anybody hasn't, please get in contact with me. I'll make sure we get you in there. We also have a lot of you now signed up to our COVID-19 care survey. So that's fantastic. We're beginning to get the full results in from those and share those with organizations, both their reporting and their comments and suggestions. If anybody wants to have a conversation about that at the end, let us know. We'd love to get you signed up for that. Okay, brilliant. I can see that we've still got participants joining. So we're just going to do a little bit of housekeeping. Like I said, you seem to all be able to see and hear, so that's great. We will be sharing the slides and the recording of this webinar afterwards. So you'll be able to share with your teams and get a copy of this as well. We'll try and do our best to keep the timing the same as last time. So we're going to be with you for the next hour or so. We're sincerely hoping that we have no hackers join us on this Zoom webinar this morning. And I know a lot of us are getting used to the Zoom piece. So if you need to move me or the video out of the way so you can see the slides, just kind of do what works best for you guys. We really hope you're going to learn something out of today around this kind of building and maintaining trust, and Cathal and Colin are really going to take you through it in detail. But please let us know in the chat if there's anything specific you'd like to get out of today, anything in particular you'd like covered. And like with the last week's webinar, keep those questions coming. We will be opening this up to much more of a conversational style. So keep those questions coming through in the chat. Send them to me. We do have a couple of questions that people have sent us beforehand as well. So we'll be using those in the webinar as we go forward. And we are going to have a handover midway, just so you guys are aware of that. We have practiced it. We hope it's going to work. Bear with us if it doesn't, but everything should work pretty smoothly. Just to give you a sense of what we're going to cover today, so I'm going to hand over to Cathal shortly. He's going to take you through the kind of Great Place to Work perspective and talk you through the Trust Bank. And then he'll be introing Colin, who's going to take you through kind of things around behaviours that build trust, the role of communication, how we can support managers this time. And we are going to have an open Q&A at the end. So please send through your questions for that, send through your questions for us on the speakers. And we'll kind of be ready to go then. Great, okay, we have, looks like nearly everybody in at the moment. are in by now. So actually, Cathal, I think the best thing is I'm gonna pass over to you. Guys, keep the questions coming. I'll be fielding them and sending them across to the guys. So get in touch, and I'll hand you over to Cathal.
Great, Fania. Thank you very much. Hello to everyone. Hope you're all well. Hope your friends and family are all safe as we head into this Easter weekend. So I know for many of us on the call, we have been sort of dabbling in this idea of remote working. It might be one person within the company, a team of people working in a virtual space, and suddenly, if you like, without warning, we've all been forced to work in a virtual space, and that's a sense as to why we put on today's webinar. Conscious as well that kind of as soon as COVID-19 sort of kicked in, LinkedIn and social media was flooded with all sorts of tips and advice about how to do this remote working. And how to manage culture while people are working remotely, top 5 tips, top 10 tips. There was a lot of noise out there around how to do this. And I guess a Great Place to Work, we wanted to support clients by allowing you to make research-based decisions around what things you should and can do for your people at the moment. So we know many on the call are doing great things. As Fania said, lots of companies have started that COVID pulse survey. It's still available for companies if you want to do it. We've analysed the comments and suggestions we've received back from employees, so we can see that already great things are being done, and we hope to kind of share some of those approaches, if you like, on this call. So just sort of this visual that we're going to show up now, just on the next slide, Fania, the visual here. So in a way, this is how I like to sort of think about where we're at the moment and perhaps where we're going to. Okay, so for a lot of us pre-COVID, we were managing our businesses, we were leading our businesses, we were building strong cultures, building trust levels. Economies were good, unemployment was low. And all of a sudden then, if you like, the situation sort of kicked into gear. And for many of us, we have been forced into making difficult decisions. We have been forced into working into this virtual space. The good news, so it's not all doom and gloom, is we will get out of this. We will come out the other side. As our American colleagues would say, is we'll get to meet the sunshine out the far side. We're not sure when that will be, but we will come out the other end of this. And I guess where we're at the moment is, how do we communicate with our employees in this current situation? How do we ensure that there's an information flow? How do we look after their well-being? How do we recognize them? How do we engage them? These are the things that we are grappling with. And we have lots of great workplaces on the call. And a thing that binds us all together as companies is this idea of trust, okay? Because a great workplace is a high trust workplace. And what we know is that high trust workplaces will come through this situation quicker than low trust organizations. High trust workplaces will get the sort of agility you need from your employees quicker than low trust organizations. Another way I like to think about this idea of trust is trust almost like a bank, almost like an ATM, if you like. So we build up our trust over time, and many of you are doing that by doing great things for your people and your culture. And in times of need, which we are certainly in right now, when you have to make difficult decisions, you withdraw from that bank, you take from that ATM machine. So the positive news is that we are high trust workplaces, and we have a much better chance of coming through this in a better shape than a low trust organization. So that's sort of a sense in terms of just trying to frame the discussion. As Fania said, please use the chat function. We're interested in your ideas, your thoughts, your comments, your suggestions. I'm going to introduce Colin now, and the next slide, actually, this is freshly taken from Colin's research, so apologies for that, Colin, but certainly one of the things that Colin has seen is that the most powerful of trusting relationships is this idea of the relationship between the employee and their immediate line manager. And that absolutely is supported by what we see within Great Place to Work, the power of that relationship between an employee and a line manager. And we can see from the COVID survey in the comments that some line managers are doing very well in terms of building trust at the moment with their teams, and some line managers are struggling in that space. So what can we do for those group of line managers? So Colin is from TU Dublin. TU Dublin have been a great partner, a great place to work, have been our partner on our Most Trusted Leader Award for many years. Colin he's a good friend of mine. I know himself, he's grappling with new twins. So trying to balance that work and home piece at the moment, and doing his research. And Colin, I don't think you've ever been on trend, but you now are on trend with your topical research of how you build trust in virtual.
First time for everything, I suppose.
So over to you, Colin.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, everyone, and I hope everyone's keeping well this morning and in this kind of strange times. What I'd like to do is spend the next few minutes, I suppose, talking through, I suppose, my research into the area of trust in virtual teams. So as Carl said, it's something that that's all of a sudden become really, really popular. Given there was I suppose a steady growth towards virtual teams anyway, but now we're in a situation where people have been forced to work remotely. So again, this is something that I'd like to share with you today. So, as Carl said, I'm head of the Graduate Business School at TU Dublin, and my research focused specifically on managers and employees and how you build trust when you're working in virtual teams. So the first thing I suppose I'd start with is to say that the good news on this is that trust is built face-to-face for most of the relationships that have now, I suppose, gone remotely all of a sudden. And my research shows that trust that's already there, relationships can maintain and actually can develop further in a virtual workspace. So there's no need for mass panic just yet. For those relationships, I suppose, where there isn't a strong level of trust, or there wasn't a strong level of trust before we started, I kind of think of this as an opportunity in many ways as well. So if you think of that Chinese proverb, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, the second best time is today. So there will be tips and insights from this presentation that will hopefully help you to overcome some of those issues as well. Just before we start, in terms of defining trust and what trust means, so I suppose this is one of the most popular definitions of trust, which is basically trust is about the willingness to be vulnerable to another person based on positive expectations. And this definition here from Mayer et al. Basically talks about irrespective of the ability to monitor or control that other party. And that's, I suppose, very timely at the moment. And where we're working virtually, there's less visibility in many ways. And again, what the research shows is that trust is even more important when you're working in virtual or remote relationships. People will tend to trust people based on their trustworthiness. So you tend to trust someone based on how trustworthy is that other person. And the way I like to think about this, instead of going through another definition, is let's picture the scenario where somebody in your organization tells you that you're going on a team trip tomorrow to wear something comfortable and let's meet downstairs in the lobby or the foyer of the building. So everyone arrives the next day and you're wearing your comfortable clothes and there's a coach parked outside. So everyone boards the coach and the coach takes off, goes down onto the motorway, and it pulls off at the airport. So everyone's thinking, great, they're bringing us to Vegas for the weekend on a team building trip. But instead of going to the departures, the coach goes around the back onto the tarmac and there's a plane, a kind of a funny looking plane sitting there. And next thing you're told that you're going to do a parachute jump. So, but the kicker is that somebody else on your team has packed your parachute. So the question is, what are the attributes of a parachute packer? What are the attributes of the person that you hope has packed your parachute? So maybe just use the chat function there very quickly to let Fania know what type of characteristics or attributes is that parachute packer.
It's somebody very quick off the bat here, hoping that it was a socially distanced coach that we are all getting onto. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Colin, I've got a few coming in. We've got things like attention to detail from the person who is packing, safety, that they were a good packer.
Sure.
That they'd maybe had a bit of training, somebody who maybe likes you, so somebody clearly you get on with, and that kind of piece. So yeah, a few different bits and pieces coming in there from people.
Okay, so basically trustworthiness really is about three things, and this is the easy way to think about it. It's about ability, so that person has the ability to pack a parachute. It's about benevolence, so that they have a level of care and concern, so they don't want you to fall out of a plane without a parachute. And it's about integrity, so that level of conscientiousness, honesty, openness, and so on. So that little ABI model is a good way, as we progress through this talk, to think about why would people trust other people. They usually trust them on one or more of those factors, A, B, or I. So getting just down to the, I suppose, to the research in terms of what it shows is that behaviors are the key element that drive, perceptions and trustworthiness. So people will trust you based on how you behave towards them and towards other people as well. And there's two types of behavior: trustworthy behaviors. So how do you demonstrate you're a good parachute packer? And also trusting behaviors. How do you demonstrate that you trust them? And we'll talk a little bit later as to why that's important. But essentially, it's important that people feel trusted, because when you feel trusted, you're much more likely to reciprocate and to work hard to reward that trust. And also, you're much more likely to trust the other person in return. So, but there's a couple of other things that influence it as well. So there's certain personal factors. Some people are more likely to trust people than others. Some people are better communicators, and so on. Communication in itself, as to how you're leveraging communication tools, the nature, the availability, the speed of communication. There's factors that are unique to the relationship. There's that sense of maybe connection within the relationship, that mutual felt trust and openness. And then there's a whole range of contextual factors that actually the organization or HR departments can actually help with. So these are the kind of four key areas. For the purposes of this, really, I'm going to focus on that middle area, which is what are the actual behaviors that people can focus on. So if we take a manager and employee at the moment, a manager on the left, the employee on the right, I've purposely used kind of silly images there to show that people are in this forced situation. They're not in their usual work from home. There's childcare issues. There's all sorts of different kind of, I suppose, pressures on them at the moment. That's something that we should remain mindful of. But if we look at the two types of behavior, so first of all, how do you demonstrate that level of trustworthiness? How do you demonstrate that you're a trustworthy person? So employees told me that they look for managers to be open. So what does that openness look like? Well, first of all, it looks at openness in terms of being honest with them about the situation. So at the moment, what's happening? What's happening with COVID-19? What's happening with contingency planning? What are we likely to do afterwards? What are their views? What are their expectations, their vision for where the team is going to go, or the department or function is going to go? And ultimately what they say is they want basically leaders to have their cards on the table. They don't want to feel like they're hiding something from them, and they shouldn't have to hear things from other people within the business. And that's, at a time like this, that's particularly crucial, I suppose. And we've seen this in the past with other crises, or in I suppose periods of change where there's a communication vacuum and the rumor mill then dominates. So how do we actually keep people updated in an open way?
Colin, sorry, just to jump in there, is that in a practical sense, is that a leader looking to balance the now as in what we're facing at the moment with the future, being future focused, or how would that play out?
Yeah, and that's really, I suppose, that's demonstrating this employee centric leadership. The second one, that you're really, I suppose, focusing on their personal welfare and also their professional welfare. So if you take that from a personal situation, and again, my study was done before COVID-19, but notwithstanding that, employees want leaders and managers that are going to look out for them on a personal level. Now, that's particularly important because when you're working remotely and you're working from home, it takes you a while to get into the rhythm doing that. So you for example, the work-life balance suffers, the exercise, the well-being, the mental health piece can suffer as well. You can kind of be always on. And I suppose if we know that up front, and we know that it takes people a while to adjust to that, and we don't necessarily have that period of time, is that managers can help with that in terms of checking in, looking after them.
Right. You need an ambulance? Oh, you're better now? No ambulance now, okay.
And then I suppose from a professional point of view then is how are you supporting them and looking after them in a professional point of view. So how are you giving them support within the business, helping them do their job, helping them if there's multiple kind of I suppose what would you say, calls on their time and pressures on them, particularly if they're in matrix teams and so on. So how do you help support them in a professional manner? And to your point, Cathal, how do you keep that conversation going about the next steps in terms of ongoing development? Hopefully we're all coming through this period and say we'll come out the other side, and then it's a sense of, well, what's happening now when we go back? There'll be no going back to the normal, because I think the normal, that ship has sailed. But the new reality when we enter into it, how do we keep having those developmental conversations with people? In terms of it, then what managers look for in employees, again, that level of openness. So what does that look like from an employee point of view? Well, again, it's been open to taking feedback. It's been open to hear about the developmental areas they need to work on. But it's also been open to, in a situation where there's less visibility for the manager, is to tell me what's happening on the ground. Tell me what's happening and what you need support with. Tell me if you're concerned. Tell me if you're struggling with something. Show some vulnerability there. Let me know and I can help you. But if I don't know, I can't help you. So again, managers look for that level of openness. And ultimately, managers look to be able to rely on people. So I need to be able to rely on you to do the job. And what I found is ability obviously is an important thing there. But in my research, it came more down to the attitude. So I had a couple of situations. So in one particular team, interviewed a manager with 2 reports, and both there were performance challenges with both. One showed that willingness to take on the feedback and worked on that and improved the performance in the area they needed to, and the other one didn't. So trust in one way built really, really strongly as a result, and trust in the other relationship eroded. So again, it's more so around the attitude. Most people are able to do the job. It's whether they have the right attitude and are willing to work hard to do it to the right level.
Colin, just to stop you there, I've got a couple of questions that have come in from guys, from the participants. So one is around, so getting that conversation going and getting that level of openness going. Is there a way that people can help people bring those ideas to the fore? So like kind of getting that idea sharing happening from a manager and employees. And actually very similar questions come in. What if the ideas coming in or the elements coming in from people, they know they won't work or they're not going to have practical implications in the organization?
Sure. So I suppose firstly, what I found is the openness in relationships tends in most parts to be driven by the leader, by the manager. And they tend to open that and say, listen, we're going to be open with each other from the start. I'm going to assume trust from the start. I'm going to share my insights and my thoughts around certain things with you. But in some cases, they're not to be shared outside, and we need to respect that. But if we can start with that level of openness and we feel like we can have those open, honest conversations, we'll be a lot better for it. And sometimes it's as simple as actually starting out and actually saying that, and then I suppose demonstrating that trust by showing the employees what they mean by that, telling them what your plans are, telling them what your vision is for the team or for the future, and so on. So giving them an insight into what you're thinking, I think can really help in that regard. In terms of the listening piece, I suppose, and again, this comes to the point that I'm about to go to here, to show people you trust them. And one of the elements of showing people you trust them is that seeking and respecting input. So that you're respecting their expertise and their knowledge and so on. Yes, not every time will you actually take that on and use that to make the final decision. But I think by and large, where people feel respected and they feel like you are listening to them, they'll appreciate that they're not going to go with your idea every single time, but they might go with it the next time. So it's, I think, being respectful of people.
Just on the just jumping in on the openness piece, maybe from a practical point of view, some of the things we're seeing, Colin, out there. We've seen some companies just organize listening sessions. So, listening sessions perhaps like they would do in a normal setting, but listening sessions online. I think it's important that leaders don't resist the urge to feel like you need to know everything right now. It's okay to ask people for their suggestions, for their thoughts. Obviously, the survey and the COVID survey has been one way of kind of creating that openness and listening to what's going on with employees. For many of the companies on the call as well, I would say you already have working groups, internal Great Place to Work teams or engagement groups. What role can they play right now? And I think they probably can play a role in terms of that listening piece. And then some simple ideas like a dedicated Ask a CEO email address where people can share their ideas, if you like. So just some of the practical things I guess we're seeing out there from companies.
Great, thanks, Cathal. And I think, and that's particularly important, that showing people you trust them is particularly important, because what I mentioned before is trust begets trust. So, if you feel trusted, you're much more likely to perform and you're much more likely to trust the other person. And interestingly, there's decades of research on this to back this up. But interestingly, in the last couple of years, there's been research in the area of neuroscience where they actually draw blood and they measure for something called oxytocin. So they've actually brought the hard sciences into actually proving this whole notion of felt trust. So again, respecting openness, seeking and respecting input, and then also autonomy. So autonomy is a huge one in terms of remote management. So what I kind of find is there's two types of leader. There's the leader who has that level of trust and demonstrates that trust and is clear around the expectations and gives someone tasks or roles to do and lets them get on with it, but checks in to see how they can support them. There's the other type of leader who hounds the people, literally countless times a day looking for updates. And that just demonstrates that you don't trust them. And it can be, that's how employees feel about that, and it can be very damaging to the relationship. So again, there's that, I suppose, being able to pull back from if your natural tendency is to micromanage. It can be difficult to, obviously, there can be an information vacuum sometimes or a lack of visibility when you're working remotely. So again, it's clarifying those expectations from employees as to how you would like to be kept up to date and what you need in order to be kept up to date. I think if that's that shared understanding, well, that can help to do away with or certainly minimize that level of micromanagement. Again, openness in terms of, so you'll see openness is a key theme here, where employees are open with leaders around their challenges, around when they need support and so on. Well, that actually shows the manager or the leader then that the employee trusts them, because they're willing to be vulnerable to them. They're willing to say, I need support on X, Y, or Z. I'm not sure how I do this. So they're showing vulnerability in terms of their own maybe capabilities in order to get the job done. And that doesn't necessarily damage future career prospects. That actually, the leaders actually really appreciate that, because they know that person is willing to work on those blind spots or those areas of weakness to actually strengthen. So in terms of within those high trust dyads that I looked at, and not all the dyads I mean manager-employee relationships, not all those relationships were high trust, but the ones that were, there was three key areas that stood out really. There was mutual felt trust. So there was both parties felt trusted by the others through these behaviors, which I've spoken about here. There was that sense of connection within the relationship. So they connected on a personal level. They knew what people's thoughts were, what their views were on different things, really through that open conversations and communications. They knew a bit about their personal background, that type of thing. And they were aligned. They were aligned in terms of the expectations, the vision for the team, and where they were trying to go to and what they were trying to achieve. But again, you only get to that level of alignment where you have that level of openness, and also where the communication is strong. And that brings me to communication, which is a massive theme in terms of, understandably, when you're working virtually. So there's multiple communication platforms. How best do you manage them? And how best do you communicate? And one of the key areas that came up that people raised is that they bemoaned the agenda-focused nature of a lot of virtual communications. So they basically said, when we're in the office, we have informal chats about all sorts of different things, from what you did at the weekend to how the kids are and how your sports team performed at the weekend or wherever else. They kind of find that, particularly when you first start working virtually, it can be very agenda-focused. So it can be very straight to the point. And where people are under pressure, where managers in the business are under pressure, and they're doing a ton of calls every day, you know, we certainly have been lately, there's a tendency to get through each call because you have another one and another one and another one after that. And particularly when you're in the moment and you're contingency planning and you're trying to put structures in place to make sure you're surviving this thing and coming out the other side stronger, there can be a lot of pressure on that. So it's reminding people to take a step back and remember the personal side of things and having a bit of a chat as well.
Colin, just on that, there's a couple of questions in.
Great.
And I think link into this. So it's this piece around, I suppose, how can organizations demonstrate their caring for employee well-being? I suppose that kind of linked into there. And actually we've got a question in, like, is home the greatest place to work? And is there any evidence around that as well?
Is home the greatest place to work? It really depends on what your setup is. I mean, I have a home office here. It's quite comfortable. I have everything I need. I work from home quite a bit. But as Cathal says, I have twin boys who will be coming up to bed beside me soon because there's no childcare at the moment. So it really depends. Ordinarily, it can be great. It can minimize commuting times. Once you have, I suppose, the cadence and the structure of your day right, you can get out, you can do your exercise, and so on. You're gaining, in some cases, a couple of hours a day from commutes and so on. What I found is, I interviewed people working from home, and I also interviewed people working in remote hubs or regional offices and so on. And that's a growing thing where you're going to see clusters and, I suppose, work pods kind of popping up that people can go to. So really, I suppose it's how you're set up and how you're set up as an individual, your suitability for. Some people will really miss that kind of office environment, and they can feel very isolated working by themselves. It's a long day sometimes, and they can find it hard to balance the work-life piece. And what can organizations do on the work-life balance piece? I've actually seen interesting things lately where teams are doing things like they're just taking the focus off and doing things like team table quizzes. They're doing things like people are posting up the exercise they're doing. They're doing group yoga sessions, on Zoom and different platforms. They're doing all sorts of things to encourage people to get out there. But really, the managers can encourage that. We know that that's an issue. That's really strong in my research that it's an issue. Even for long-term virtual workers, they fall into that habit of forgetting about exercise and so on. When you're in a working situation, there's natural breaks, there's natural lunch breaks, or people will swing by for a coffee. There might be exercise classes, or people might go for a run and so on at lunchtime. That's not there when you're at home. So I think as organizations, we can kind of step in and ask people to check in on other people and to try and create that bit of a culture that people are looking after their own health. Yeah,
brilliant. Cathal, do you have anything to add on that?
Maybe just a few things just to add what Colin said there. So I think I love the question, is home the greatest place to work? I think the first week a lot of us desperately scrambled to position our desks for our Zoom calls with the bookshelf strategically placed in the background. And then kind of once we all got used to sort of where we would be working from, we've seen some that have adapted well, but to be honest with you, through the comments, suggestions that we've got back from the survey, some are struggling as well, and some employees are struggling, and it ranges. We have some individuals who are living on their own, and perhaps don't have a great connection with their manager, and they feel a little isolated. So we've got to check in on those people too. We're seeing a lot of challenge, certainly with parents, in terms of trying to balance this idea of work and home, and trying to get that disconnect, trying to disconnect work from home and being able to switch off. They're asking their managers to kind of be aware of that, to understand that a little bit more. So we're seeing a range of things at the moment, I would say, in terms of in terms of on that. But we're learning as we go, right? So in a way, this is the greatest learning opportunity around, can we do this working from home piece that perhaps we'll ever get as a company, as a community, as a country, you know. So, and then in terms of the employee well-being question, was the other one, Fania, was it, around how to look after employees' well-being? You know, some of the things Colin said there, I think, are great. I mean, one way a leader, a company can look after an employee's well-being is get information to them. You know, ensure that there's a flow of information. People are concerned right now. So one great practice company, they're a startup organization in Wexford. Every morning at 10:30, they have their communication update. They talk about they remind people of the purpose of the organization. They talk about the numbers. But before all of that, they spend 5 minutes asking people, how is everyone feeling? How is everyone doing? And on that call, they actually give the latest COVID-19 update to their employees. And I've spoken to some of the employees about how that makes them feel. And for a lot of them, they rely on that as their one information source for COVID-19. And they don't feel all this pressure to look at, you know, news all day long and to look at social media. They use that update that they get from the company as that one information source. So I think that's a good practice. It shows a sense of caring. Highly correlated with well-being is development. So ensuring that we're still having those developmental conversations. Is there an opportunity to have coaching type conversations? Is there an opportunity to coach employees around things that you always said you would? Can we use that time now? But development is highly correlated with your well-being, as well. And then perhaps it's a simple enough one. I know some companies are good, some companies are challenged, but the reality is we're working from home now, so it's okay maybe to have your kid and your child that comes in on the video call every now and then. It's okay for the pet to be shown on the call. And I think leaders can set the tone there in terms of how they operate themselves, in terms of role modeling. But it's okay, I think, for that to happen. I'm not sure, Colin, about the twins. They might cause awful chaos if they were on.
Yeah, that could get out of hand pretty quickly.
Right. Say the working from home piece is causing some hot debate in our chat. People being pro and anti it. So
sure, yeah. And it really depends. It depends on what suits the individual. I suppose my view on that would be, you work in the type of environment where you're most productive and you're happiest, you know, and for some people that can be home. For some people in my research, they said to me, I've been working from home for a couple of years now, and I like to go into the office sometimes to reconnect, to have a coffee, to catch up with people. But I find it very noisy. I find it very busy. I find it very hard to concentrate. There's a huge amount of interruptions. Whereas I'm at home, I can manage my time a little bit better because I kind of get to orchestrate what my day looks like a little bit more. So there's not people just floating by my desk every couple of minutes and I'm there and they'll have a chat with me. I think as well, I think it's important because isolation is a big issue there, and Cathal mentioned that. And a lot of the studies on this show that one of the downsides to remote working and home working is that sense of isolation. And as we progress through the other side of this, it's a matter for organizations to think about where they have things like matrix structures as well, and what we call hybrid teams. And hybrid teams where you have a couple of people in the team co-located with the manager in an office, and then a couple of team members, one or more team members in a separate location. That might be just remote working from home, or it might be in a separate regional office. And again, what my studies show, and it backs up previous research, is that the people that are remote from the managers feel that sense of isolation, and they also feel that the people that are with the manager are at an advantage in terms of their career development, their relationship with the manager, and so on. And that where opportunities come up for career progression, that they're less likely to be put forward for them because they don't have the same level of connection and relationship with the manager. And that's really something that came up quite strongly, and it's something that as we go forward and we think about how we'll structure things in the future, it's something to be aware of. In terms of communication, that kind of sense of availability or proximity, that employees working remotely have to feel that the manager is, you know, down the hall, you know. that they're really available for them. They can offer support and guidance. And sometimes that's a quick instant message, or sometimes it's, can we have a chat, a 2-minute call? I'm just stuck on something and I need your thoughts, or I need your go ahead, or something like that. So it's really important that managers are able to manage multiple communication tools. So again, in my study, the very experienced virtual managers would see email as some way of sending out a blanket kind of communication, but they don't really see it as communication. They see it as a kind of I'm sending a message out there. But they will then say, right, I need to leverage IM, WhatsApp, different companies have different tools to provide that level of support. And employees were really, really strong on that managers need to have a good skill set in this regard. And even things like using video conferencing, using the camera to help build and maintain that sense of connection. And that came across as quite strong. There's no doubt that face-to-face plays a huge role in helping to build relationships. And I mentioned this previously, particularly at the start of relationships, but also to Cahill's point around coaching conversations and different types of conversations, and allowing people to go beyond the agenda and just get to know each other a little bit more. And obviously we're restricted in terms of face-to-face, but at the moment, but it is something that we need to be mindful of as we go forward, what that blend is of face-to-face versus virtual. And that's something that we might come back to at a later stage. So what can organizations or HR professionals do to help? I know we've a lot of HR professionals on the call, but we've managing directors and CEOs and so on. So what can we do to help managers and employees build those high levels of trust? Because we know where there's high trust, there's high performance. Well, we can identify what supports managers need. And we can remember that, like, managers are thrown into this situation in the same way employees are. So they're struggling to adjust in the same way. And not all managers, in the same way, not all employees, not all managers are suited to virtual leadership roles. Some of them struggle a little bit more. And I'm mindful of this Warren Buffett quote that's doing the rounds at the moment, talking about how businesses are ready for a downturn or a recession and so on. And he basically says, it's only when the tide goes out that you see who is swimming naked. And really in my study, it really came to the fore that managers that weren't very strong communicators in a face-to-face, a co-located setting, that was really detrimental when they moved into a virtual management role, because that became really, really obvious that they were poor communicators and it damaged the relationship. So how do we support them? Well, we try and equip them. We make sure they have the right information on developments. And Cathal mentioned this as well. If they're going to have those open conversations and keep people informed, well, then your management team obviously need to know. Communication platforms.
I've actually got a question directly on that. So somebody's asking, this piece that how do you maintain that trust when everything is so fluid at the moment? So you're making commitments, you're making announcements, and then there's updates from the government coming, and that's changing at pace. So just wondering how managers and organizations how can they handle that change of pace and the changing nature of information coming in so quickly?
Yeah, it reminds me, we work with a lot of companies we're a huge provider of executive education and worked with a lot of companies over the last 15 plus years. And we've been through a few different situations there, the financial crisis. I was managing a pig meat program in the middle of the pork crisis back in, I think, 2008. So we've come through a number of these periods. And really, I suppose, where people are honest, sometimes organizations don't have the answers, and sometimes they're working on coming up with the answers, and they're putting a lot of time into that. And sometimes they just need the time to do that. And I think sometimes where you tell people, listen, there hasn't been any decisions made, we're working on things at the moment, but you'll be the first to know. Sometimes it just kills the rumor mill. The rumor mill is just paralyzing for performance and for mental health for people and so on. If people are really, really worried about jobs and so on. So where you have positive information and where you can share that, get out there and share that where you can. Now, people will understand if not all the decisions have been made, and that shows a level of trust, because that shows a level of vulnerability from a leadership position, and not all leaders are willing to do that. They're not willing to, I suppose they put pressure on themselves to have all the answers all the time. But when something like COVID-19 hits, there's no way everyone can have the information and all the answers from day one. They need some time to come up with that.
Yeah, I think maybe just to add to that as well. So thinking about the flow of information and the flow of communication, And if you think of the exec team all the way down through middle managers, through their teams, we've seen a lot of pressure amongst the line manager in terms of what information can I share, how do I share it. One very simple practice, I think it's a great practice, Avant-Garde, they're possibly on the call today, but once a week, all their leaders, line managers will get on a call, a leadership connect session, and they'll talk about messages, they'll talk about communications, they'll support each other in terms of how to communicate that message on to their team. So I think there's an important piece there around building that community of practice amongst your leaders and your managers that they're sharing with each other, and supporting them in terms of communicating the message to their teams.
Yeah, and I think consistency of message is really important to that point. I know we've been doing a lot of work to make sure that whatever messages go out to different groups, that there's consistency there, and that we're not creating more confusion. So having those detailed discussions as a management team, I think, is particularly important. In terms of communication platforms, how organizations can help, I mean, people need the tools. They need good tools in order to communicate properly. And they also need some guidance and maybe training on those platforms. That doesn't have to be, detailed training, but it needs to be maybe, well, how do you leverage which tools and what things, what tools are good for what purposes, and to give them a sense of that. In my study, I know even though some of the companies had a ton of, really good communication tools and platforms, they were then using things like WhatsApp for informal chats around just, people in different locations, how are things, sharing jokes, just creating that human element and that sense of connection as well. And then I suppose equipping them with some tips, which hopefully you'll pick up some today from this, on how they build trust. So equipping your managers with things like, demonstrating concern, going out there and how you build that relationship and how you support people remotely. And then in terms of ways to maintain morale and show you care, again, I mentioned this before, I know a Great Place to Work are doing some great table quizzes at the moment, and other organizations are doing really interesting things there. Is there really small things that the organization can say, hey, we're going to sponsor a couple of small prizes for table quizzes, and, things like that. Is there anything we can do just to, inexpensive things, but just things to show that you're trying to keep that level of humanity and fun within the workplace as well? Just
to say, Colin, there's a lot of value for non-work related connections between employees right now. We do our quiz every Friday. Joseph is our resident quiz master. It's lots of fun. We don't talk about work. There isn't enough 80s boy band questions on it for my liking, but it's great fun. It's just a great way to connect. So, I'd really encourage companies to do some of those things for their teams.
And it's interesting when you see a lot of the recent research from consultancy houses to universities and so on about the future of work and, graduate attributes and employability and all these different things, talking about emerging tech and so on. A lot of the research is pointing to the effective workers of the future and the effective managers and leaders are people that will have those softer skills, people that will be able to demonstrate that level of humanity, will be able to build relationships, will be able to differentiate themselves from the robots, from the AI and so on. So it's coming back to that human element. So what we've covered thus far has been around what we can do in the immediate. There are some insights and findings there around the medium to long term that I've pulled out on. And there are aspects around your recruitment, the structures and processes within your organization that, as we come through this crisis and think about, what does remote working look like, or what role does it play within our organizations in the longer term? There are some other insights there from organizations that have done this well. And then key recommendations for managers, just to sum up on that. All the experienced virtual leaders that I spoke to basically said it requires more effort to manage people remotely. And you have to be more reflective in terms of thinking about the needs of people remotely, and reminding yourself to catch up with them and connect with them, and to be more intentional in showing you care. And I thought that was a great quote that someone came out on. You need to actually be more intentional, really make the effort to show that you care. And again, that's on an individual level, which I've said, just checking in often, keeping the connection, doing that on an individual and a team level, being sensitive to the fact that people mightn't be working to the absolute levels of productivity they were when they were in the office because they have other things going on, but they're doing their best. And again, being mindful of health and breaks and so on. And then on a professional level, can you help with anything? Is there anything you can do to support them? You know, to be open and give them feedback on developmental issues. So Cathal mentioned, keep the coaching conversations going. Keep the conversations going around the future. People want to see brightness on the other side of this. So keep those positive conversations happening where you can. And again, above all, show them you trust them, because that reciprocal trust will really shine through. And summing that up, but a lot of people came through in my study and said they trust managers or leaders that have their back. They trust people that have their back personally. They trust people that have their back professionally. So the key question, and there's a great Jack Welch video around this, you know, you have to have their back when they hit it out of the park. You have to have their back when they don't hit it out of the park. Do you have the backs of the people in your teams? So this all comes together in a convoluted model where you look at perceived trustworthiness, which leads to trust, which leads to trusting behavior, and links back into informing trust perceptions of trustworthiness again. And I've concentrated the discussion on a lot of these aspects, but there's a whole range of other things then that will influence that manager-employee relationship. And they're the 4 quadrants I mentioned before. The other ones: personal factors, the context within the situation, the communication aspects, and the dyadic factors, so the things within the relationship. They're things, again, some of them are for the medium to longer term, and like we will be looking at kind of releasing and publishing some information on some of those issues as we go forward. But I'll sum up by just going back to what Cathal said at the start. He has an ATM, and I had a bank, a really big bank, so I always have to outdo him. But the message there really is, we'll all make mistakes going through this period. We won't get it completely right. But if you build that level of trust and sincerity, and people think you have that level of integrity and so on, when you make those mistakes, you still have credit in the bank. It might chip away a small bit at it, but people will forgive minor trust breaches, and all of the research supports this view. So that's me. Happy to connect with anyone afterwards. There's a link there to a recent blog post that I wrote on this, and connect on LinkedIn. Happy to continue to chat, happy to share information as we go forward. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Colin. I suppose while we flick back our screens at this point, there's a lot of questions coming in now, and I suppose the first one that came in a bit earlier was, are there any positives to be taken from this? And actually, a couple of people in the comments. So this is a question from Joe: are there any positives to be taken? Jodie's been talking about like the speed of messaging and the speed of stuff that's coming out, and how that's been a real positive for their organization. And then Adrian has talked about, you know, it has shown actually that remote working can work. You know, I suppose we've all been dabbling with remote working, as Cathal was saying at the start, but this has really been an exercise to show that it can work. But I suppose any other positives that you or Cathal might be able to share with the group?
Sorry, Fanny, I lost you there for 1 second. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. I think so. It's just any other positives from this that you or Cathal can share with the group. So people talking about, so Jodie talking about the speed of messaging has come up a lot. So actually we're getting through things at pace. And Adrian talking about showing that remote working can work. But are there any other positives that you guys could share with us?
Yeah, and I think, and some of those things I'm just noting there, Jodie mentioned in the chat, I'm seeing that a lot personally. Like, we've cut right down. I'm not a fan of email. I actually despise email most of the time. And I actually find, like, as a team, we've migrated everything to a platform, and we're communicating really quickly. We're making decisions really, really quickly. And from my research as well, I saw teams doing that really well. The people that are able to leverage the communication tools in the right way, and they're not sending emails about everything, and they're not copying the whole world in every single email, and they're not arranging phone calls every 5 minutes when they don't need a phone call. I think it's the right use of communication tools. And I'm also seeing, like, the levels of productivity are probably through the roof at the moment in some ways. So notwithstanding the pressures that people are under with childcare and things like that, people get a lot of work done because there's less distractions. Now, that has to be balanced against, obviously, you know, I find that I'm doing huge hours at the moment, but many people that I'm talking to are. So you have to balance that and kind of look out for people as well. But I think, like, where people are in an environment that they're happy, that they're productive, I think that's where remote working, be it home working or hub-based working, is really, really strong. But not everyone is suited for it, and I'm not going to suggest they are. And after this, and when everything kind of goes back, not to normal, go back to whatever the new reality is, organizations will have to have a think about, are certain roles just not suited, like in terms of the nature of the role, and are certain people just not suited, and certain people just don't want to work remotely, they want to be in the office. So I think it's a great experiment, as Cathal said, and I think there will be a lot more remote working at the end of this, but again, not everyone, and it's not for everyone.
Another point coming here from Gráinne, which I think is great, is that in the communications, there's been a change on focusing on what's important rather than the urgent. So I think we've actually got better at that messaging piece, like figuring out, like you were talking about, Colin, what mediums work when, where, and why, but also the messages that we're sharing are more focused, you know, and that focus on the important message. Which is
just on that, we've got now around 800 comments back from employees in terms of the, you know, their feeling around working from home at the moment. So they're live comments, and we've seen the best of leaders and managers. We've seen people who really appreciate everything their leader and manager is doing for them. And of course, they're the managers that were high trust, I guess, to begin with, right? So some of the low trust leaders, people feel disconnected from the message because often a low trust leader is disconnected from the rest of the leadership team. So that's the thing as well. But without doubt, we've seen the best of a leadership response and a management response, and employees will call that out. When they see that happening, they'll call that out. They'll say they appreciate it. I think this will have an interesting impact in terms of future work. What's the future for leaders? The things we do now will have a lasting impact in terms of our own leadership brand.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually on that, it's coming from a couple of people, from David, from Laura. So there's a focus in our session today around the high trust piece. But what, you know, the challenges around maybe that kind of low trust cohort, or if you're starting from a low trust base, or leaders and managers who maybe aren't high trust managers and leaders. And I suppose any advice around that from either of you?
Yeah, so there's a fair body of research around trust repair. And how you actually repair trust. Most of that research was in kind of traditional working relationships, but most of the points are the same. And I saw a couple of instances within my study where trust was quite low. In fact, there was levels of distrust in some of the relationships. So I had one situation where two people, like one person was going to leave their role when someone got promoted. That's how strongly they felt that they didn't want to work for this person. They thought they weren't a team player. They thought they weren't someone that cared about their employees, and they definitely weren't someone that they wanted to work for. So there was really, really low trust, actual distrust within the relationship. And that has now transformed in primarily a virtual relationship to really high levels of what we'd call identification-based trust, a really, really strong relationship where they're so aligned that, as one of them said, I could leave this role tomorrow and that person could step in and take over exactly in the same way, in the same vein that I'm leading. So trust is absolutely repairable in a virtual environment, and you can build it virtually as well. It's about taking some of the tips here, and it's about looking at starting out and saying, well, how open am I? How do I demonstrate care and concern? The low trust relationships that I found from an employee point of view was the leaders who didn't care about the employee, didn't support them, didn't care about the future. They were all about the number. They were all about the task. They weren't based on the person. So task versus person focused leadership, there's a real distinction there. And then from a leader point of view, they didn't trust people that weren't visible. They had that need for visibility, and they were saying, like, I really don't know what they do. I can't get them. They're not available. They don't return calls. They're not available. And they start doubting then their work rate and so on. So it's a couple of things like that. It's addressing a couple of those common areas that it's not rocket science. Again, it's the human piece. It's the communication piece.
Just perhaps one quick add-on, Fanny. I know we're stuck for time there, but just one quick add-on I would say to what Colin said is, you know, if we're aware of who our high trust and our low trust leaders are right now, well, let's have a think about those low trust leaders. Maybe we can take away some of the pressure around well-being. and have a dedicated wellbeing support that teams can go to, rather than having to have that pressure all on that particular manager or that particular leader. So if we have low trust leaders right now, let's think about, I guess, how we can take some of the pressures away from them. And the other piece is just that leadership connect sessions, that community of practice. Let's try and create scenarios where our low trust leaders are learning from our high trust leaders in terms of how they're communicating right now.
Just on that point about pressure, there's actually some interesting research that came out a couple of years ago where they linked again from neuroscience. It's a Harvard Business Review article, which again we can circulate by a guy called Paul Zak, and he basically linked stress to inhibiting this oxytocin, which leads to trust. So basically the point is that when people are really under stress, they tend to focus on just getting the job done. And they're not as likely to have these conversations. They're not as open to just kind of having relaxed conversations about how people are doing and some of the softer stuff. They just are literally getting through the day. They're jumping from one meeting to the next. So again, some of those managers that aren't trusted aren't spending enough time focusing on those more human conversations. Could be managers that are hugely stressed and that have a huge workload. And they feel that they don't have the time for what they might perceive to be some of the softer stuff. So again, that's where the organization can look at that and see, is that the case?
Right, guys, I'm going to jump in here because we are losing people and it is an hour in. So if people want to stay on the call, feel free. I know I can stay for the next 10, 15 minutes and kind of happy to keep the conversation going for those of you who want to stay with us. But just to say goodbye to those of you who needed to jump off at 11, and we'll definitely be following up with the slides and the recording. It's a shame we're only getting into that low trust, high trust leadership conversation now, and I think it could definitely be something. I can see a lot of the comments and questions coming in that this is something people are definitely struggling with. So we definitely could look into doing a follow-up piece around that in particular. So for those of you who need to go, hopefully we'll be chatting to you again soon. As usual, we are going to continue this webinar series, and we're really wanting to hear from all of you what the next webinar could be, right? So it's kind of in your hands. So keep that feedback coming to us. We'll be sending out an email afterwards with kind of a wrap up on this one, and then looking for that future piece as well. We do have some stuff lined up around well-being, around remote working, around virtual recognition, but do keep that coming into us. I suppose given our numbers are dwindling, if anybody wants to kind of jump on and say hi, do feel free to pop on the video and pop on the chat. But I think just to wrap up, just to wish everybody happy Easter. Hope everyone has a safe one. Stay within your 2-kilometer radius. And Colin, I don't know if you guys have any closing thoughts for people as we've got kind of people jumping off or anything like that.
Colin, you want to jump in first there?
Well, no, I suppose I just sum up by saying, in some ways this isn't complicated. In some ways this is back to human relationships and building trust. And also a lot of the research, and some of my research has been in tech companies. It's not the tech piece that comes up. It's the human piece. It's the relationship piece and how people are supporting each other, how they're being open with each other. So it's nothing to be afraid of. It's something that as humans that is natural to a lot of people already. It's just being more intentional about that, reflecting on what you need to do and what you need to do to work a little bit harder where relevant in a virtual setting.
Yeah, I just want to say, Colin, thanks very much for joining us. I really appreciate it. You're on trend. So well done.
At last,
yeah, finally. And I just want to say to everyone that joined us, thank you very much. We really appreciate your partnership. We really appreciate you taking time to join us. We're here for you, so let's keep the conversation going. Any questions you have, any chats you want to have, we're here for you. And I hope everyone has a wonderful Easter.
Brilliant. Okay, I am going to stop the recording now.